Thank you to everyone that's hopping on. We are getting a great response. People are still joining us, and I am just thrilled that we have so many people that want to participate in tonight's author event. This is something that we'd like to continue to do with the History Center even after we get back to normal. These virtual book readings or meet the author, we'll try to do them in person when we can, but this is definitely something that we will continue to do in the future. Again, my name is Jenny Thielman, and I am the program manager with the History Center, and I'm delighted to have you all join us tonight to meet Karen Roth and hear about her books. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Karen Roth. And I would like to ask you, Karen, when you wrote a novel about the Czechs in Cedar Rapids back in the 30s, what was your inspiration? What inspired you to do this?
Well, it was my family history. My father was born there. I grew up going back there, although I did not live in the 16th Avenue district. We went back there. We'd play at my grandma's house and run around the neighborhood and run up and down 16th Avenue. Of course, back then in the 60s and 70s, everything was just so free. You could run around, have a great time. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with these old stories. I grew up visiting those stores. And then as I got older, I realized that the memories of this time were fading away. And I wanted to do something to honor this group of people in that time. And I thought I'd like to write a narrative, something that would be more fun to read than a regular history book. So that's how I got started.
Very good. So what is interesting about Cedar Rapids?
Well, you'd be surprised. I moved away from Iowa in 1980. And when I came back to Cedar Rapids, I saw it with new eyes. The education, the level of education, the level of political involvement, personal independent thinking. I saw all these characteristics so much was back in Cedar Rapids. When I started delving into the history of who moved to Cedar Rapids and what the Czechs brought with them from the old area of Bohemia, I was just amazed. They had a tremendous work ethic. They were very independent. 98% of them were literate because the old Bohemian nation actually believed in educating all their children, men, boys and girls. They were very active, very artistic. The men had social clubs, the women had artistic clubs. There were theater clubs and dancing clubs, and people played musical instruments, and it was just a vibrant community. I think you still see a lot of that today. It's a pretty interesting place.
So what were your methods for research? How did you research your topic?
I started off just by visiting the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library. That's kind of a mouthful to say, but it was just getting started, and there were a lot of volunteers there, a lot of older people who had lived through the 30s and 40s, and I would sit down and visit with them, and they'd tell me these stories. They'd tell me all these old stories. It was so fun to listen to them. And as I was working on my book, just kind of getting to the story in my mind, I found myself working in these characters, these stories, these people into the plot of the novel. And I noticed that there was just a certain sweetness about these folks and about the stories that they told. And I loved that, but I didn't want my novel just to be something wonderful and sweet. I wanted it to have some real grit and passion in it too. And I asked some of the volunteers, I said, well, what were some of the cuss words that you all used back then? And they were so cute. They didn't want to say, like, well, I forget or something like that. It's like, no, come on, tell me. And they just couldn't come up with anything. So what I had to do was I finally decided that if any of my characters were going to cuss, they would just have to cuss in Czech, and I wouldn't have to worry about doing an English translation. But there was just funny moments like that, and so that was where I began. But also I started visiting different places, the History Center, and then walking up and down 16th Avenue itself. And I can tell you a little bit about that in just a minute. if you don't mind, Jenny, I think I may go ahead and go to the PowerPoint at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And let's just remind everyone that it would be really helpful if they mute their microphones so that we don't get any background interference. I forgot to mention that at the beginning.
Yeah. And here's something that I really need to say before I get started on the research behind the books is I need to give a big shout out to the people who sell my books up in Iowa. You know, bookstores are few and far between these days, and I want to be very, very appreciative and give a big, big thank you to people like the History Center. You can find this book at the History Center. You can find it in the gift store at the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library. Sarah Wick is there. She is the manager of the bookstore, and David Molina is there, my very good friend, who is the chief librarian there. And also, you can take a visit to the Kava House Cafe in Swisher. And if you have never been there, you need to stop this Zoom right now and just go while you still can, because that is the best little restaurant Iowa, I think. It's run by my friend Karen Vondracek. She runs an amazing restaurant. They have wonderful food, and they have a neat little gift shop too. So got to give a big shout out to all my supporters there. Of course, Amazon, if you need to, you can get the book from Amazon, or you can email me too. So now that we're done with that, let's get right to the good part, which is out on 16th Avenue. And I can tell you, when I first started walking up and down the streets, now, to those of you in Texas, this might not look like much, but this is a place that's been here for, 100 years. And it had horse carts, and it had cars, and it had people walking up and down. And this old bakery here, Sikora Bakery, is still in existence. A lot of other things have changed, but this is what 16th Avenue kind of looks like today. And let's see this next one. Now, this was given to me by one of my father's friends. And what this is a hand-drawn map of the 16th Avenue district. And what I want to do, if I can figure out how to zoom in here, is show you, just take a look at all these little shops along this street. Here is, let's see, here is a drugstore. Now, for you Iowans, this is right where the Czech Cottage is right now. This was a bank. Here's a grocery store, a feed store. Don't know what this is. This is an auto shop. Here's a library. Here's the Sikora Bakery. And here's all these funny little things called RES. And you know what those are? Those are outhouses. Because would be walking up and down doing all their grocery shopping. There were meat markets here. There were a couple nursery stores here. There's a liquor store here. What else is there? Here's a tobacco store right over here. And then way down here, you go down the street, and here is Riverside Fuel Coal Yard, because so many people used coal at that time to heat their houses. That was a booming industry at the time. And right across the street is the junkyard. So you've got all that you need to live on right here. You've got your coal, you've got your junk, you've got your groceries and your liquor and your tobacco and any car part that you might need to keep your car going. So this is what 16th Avenue looked like. And this map was drawn by Chuck Youngman and John Havlicek. And John Havlicek was a friend of my father's, and that's how I got this map. So anyway, there we go on that. And I need to move so that I can keep moving along. Here's what the avenue looked like in the old days, 1938, when it was crowded with people. This is actually my mother walking along 16th Avenue with one of her friends. You see those beautiful styled outfits that they used to have and the hats. It was so fun to see that. This is Mr. Sikora, and he is the owner of Sikora Bakery. He was the founder of it. This was him back in the old days, just baking bread, having a ball. Do you know what I love about this photo? Is look at his face. He's so engaged. He's so happy. Now, he's probably not getting rich selling bakery on 16th Avenue, but he's having a wonderful time. And that was the heart of what I loved about this district. So as a writer, I began to dream up a story and dream up some characters. And I kept a bulletin board. And every time I came across some kind of image in a magazine or something, I'd cut it out and I'd stick it up on that bulletin board, because that kind of gave me a visual for what my characters looked like. So you see here, for instance, I hope some of you recognize, this is Paul Newman and his wife. Let me check her name, Joanne Woodward. Joanne Woodward. So I kind of visualized them as the family where my orphan guy moved. See, I had to have an orphan kind of drop into 16th Avenue so we could see the world through his eyes. So I came up with my 15-year-old boy named Joseph, good Czech name, and his mother was a drunk and a prostitute during the bootleg times and the Depression times, and she eventually passed away. She died, and that's why he had to come and live with his uncle and aunt. And some of you probably recognize this painting. It's called the how do you say it? The L'Absinthe, or the Absinthe Drinker, and it was painted by Degas in I think it was 1850s or 1860s. It's a very famous painting, but it kind of has that look of lostness and of stupor that comes over people when they are deep in their alcoholism. Now, this one is a photo of my dad when he was 5 years old. And Joe's uncle, John Mark, and his wife, Kate, have a couple of boys themselves, and their younger one, well, he looks just like this. So you can see that's kind of how I kind of dreamed up my story. Now, as I dreamed it up, I realized I'd have deeper into the history of our city. And so, number one, I started reading about Arthur Collins. Now, he founded Collins Radio, which actually supplied the radios to Admiral Byrd when he made his famous trek to the South Pole. My father was one of Arthur Collins' first employees, and this was a major thing in 1934. Arthur Collins was getting started, and he makes an appearance in the book. Here's another man. He wrote a book, and I've got this photo of his book here. Harold Becker was one of the founding people, one of the founders of Guarantee Bank. Now, Guarantee Bank in Rapids is a big, big deal. This bank started in 1934, in the middle of the Depression, built a very, very solid bank. I hear some chatter. Does somebody want to say something? No? Everybody okay? All right. Anyway, it was an honor to talk to him and hear his stories about how the bank took shape and what it took to get it going and how they kept it intact and solid to the bank it is today. And then when I was in the Amana colonies eating at a restaurant called Zuber's Restaurant, I found this book about this young man named Bill Zuber. In 1934, a young man came out of the Amana colonies and he played baseball in Cedar Rapids for one season. And then he went straight on to the New York Yankees and built his career there. But the amazing thing was, in the Amanas in 1934, you weren't allowed to play baseball. Boys were not allowed to play sports. The elders all thought it was a ridiculous waste of time. But Bill Zuber was so talented. He loved baseball. He was so enthusiastic. And his father actually backed him up and said, yes, you can play. And Bill Zuber went fame and glory. And the book is still there in the Zuber Restaurant in the Amana colonies today, in case you want to go check it out. So that was another fun thing I found out about. So you see, I kind of put together all these details, all these ideas, all these facts. I had a story in mind. And the stories that I love most are about people who are going through a very difficult time, but who finally come out of their shell and gain their strength and kind of come into their own. So what I'd like to do right now is read a few passages from this book. I hope that you enjoy them. I'm going to try and show a little bit of the culture of the 16th Avenue district at that time, and also a little bit of insight into Joe's heart and what really much. So This first passage is kind of a fun passage. John Mark, the father here, is taking his family along with his newly discovered nephew to a dance at the CSPS hall. And that's where we begin. A burst of voices and polka music met John Mark and the boys as they walked into the auditorium of the CSPS hall. On most nights, men's and women's groups met in the lodge rooms, or theater groups used the stage to rehearse their plays. Tonight, the chairs were cleared away and a band was playing. Couples were already circling around the floor. John Mark led the boys to the dining area by the bar, a table for Kate and Rosina. Stephen wanted to go then threw a bag and them a quarter and told them to go buy root beers at the pass-through window. Women and children did not go into the bar room. It was a long, smoky space, 50-foot-long wooden bar. But there was an open window from the bar to the dining area. And drinks could be ordered there by one who could pay. Anton and Joe, at their age, could have worked their way into the bar for their root beers, but they went to the window for now. The night was just beginning. So Carl and his sons joined them, along with some of their neighbors. As soon as everyone was settled, John Mark pulled Kate out to dance. The single men and women clustered at opposite sides of the room, and pairs or threesomes of bachelors would make the long trip across the floor to invite the women to dance. The band finally took a break and everyone sat down. Pardon? Yep, I got it. Okay. Sorry, I heard someone make a comment. I just had to stop and find out what it was. Let's see, where was I? The band finally took a break and everyone sat down and have a drink. When the music started up again, Kate pulled Aaron out to dance and Carl took Rosina's hand, so John Mark invited little Rose. Rosie, you're almost as tall as Kate, he said, as he guided her around the floor. Who's been teaching you to dance? I practice with Mom at home, she said, or Wentz if he lets me. John Mark led her through a little twirl. Very nice, he said. Your dad is going to have to fight off the boys with a baseball bat when you grow up. Rose looked almost grown up right now in her flowered dress and black shoes with ankle straps. He already does, Rose giggled. I'm not allowed to dance with anyone who's not married. John Mark laughed and twirled her around again. The band was playing a set of American tunes now, and the music was slow. John Mark caught sight of Wentz on the dance floor, not far from them. Who's your brother dancing with? He asked Rose. Rachel Sedlock, she said. She's not supposed to be here. John Mark looked back. He was smiling down at a young woman with brown eyes and smooth brown hair. Why isn't she supposed to be here? He asked Rose. Aren't her parents with her? She doesn't have parents. She lives with her grandparents. They run the Otis Street grocery store, and they don't like free thinkers, Rose said. Her family was all free thinkers. They don't even like the CSPS hall because free thinkers meet there. What happened to her parents? John Mark asked. Rose shrugged. I don't know. I think her mom left or something. John Mark looked at the girl again, then back at Rose. How come you know all this stuff? Her sister's in my class, she said confidentially. John Mark glanced back at Wentz just in time to see him pull Rachel deeper into the circle of his arms. If they kept on dancing that closely, the gossip about Rachel would get back to the Otis Street grocery store before she did. So that's one passage from our book there. Let me move on to, I hope that y'all aren't being too bored. I hope you're enjoying all this. But I want to go back to the book and read just another short passage from a little further along. Let's see. Here we go. Because I want you to see a little bit of what was going on in Joe's life and heart. So let me read a short little passage. This is set in Ellis Park. For all the benefit of you Texas folks, Ellis Park is an old park in Cedar Rapids, and it has a beautiful golf course, and close to the clubhouse, there is a pond with lily pads in it. And the boys would go there, search for balls in the water, and then they'd sell those golf balls back to the golfers and make a little bit of money. And my father actually did this. That's how I know about it. So we have Johnny and Joe doing this. They're going to make some money by finding golf balls. And they walk the long way to Ellis Park. And here they are at the parking lot of the golf club house. Oh, geez, Johnny breathed. The two boys were standing in the parking lot at the golf course looking at cars. Look at that. The sky blue car in front of him had a cream-colored leather interior and a shiny chrome Greyhound on its hood. That's just a Lincoln, Joe told him. This one's the real beauty. It's a Nash. Ever been in one of these? Johnny looked over at the bottle green coupe next to the Lincoln. It was huge, with white-walled tires and silvery chrome detailing. This car has shatterproof glass windows and a back seat so big, it's like a double bed, Joe told him. It has a place to put a champagne bottle, and in the winter, it's warmer than a house. Johnny had never been in any car, except for his uncle's black Model A Ford, which his father had told him was a very good car, much better than the Model Ts that were hard to start and couldn't go uphill without stalling. Vincent Model A seemed like an old horse buggy now compared to these beauties. How'd you ever get to ride in one of these? He asked. My mom went with this one bootlegger guy for a while, Joe said. They like the Nashes because of the windows. Wow, was all Johnny could say. So, what's it like to ride in it? Joe didn't answer right away. Johnny looked over at him. He was staring at the car. I said, what's it like to ride in it? Johnny said, a little louder. It took a moment for Joe to snap out of whatever daze he was in. I only rode in it once, he said after a while. The bootlegger guy didn't like kids. He was a goon anyway. I hated him. What was he like? Johnny asked. Did he have a gun? He looked back at the Nash, picturing a dark-haired man who looked like Clark Gable sitting in the driver's seat. Joe gave a harsh laugh. You see this? You ever been hit this hard? He asked, tapping the scar on the side of his face. Know what I got this for? For coming inside when I wasn't supposed to. I was 10. He didn't like me to sleep inside with them at night, so I had to sleep on the porch. Man, that's tough, Johnny marveled. Didn't you get cold? Well, yeah, idiot, I got cold. Why'd you think I came inside and got clocked like that? Joe snapped. I hated his guts. He'd beat me up, and I'd steal his cash and cigarettes to get back at him. That's how I got this. He held up his hand with the burn mark across the palm. A fire poker, he said to Johnny. That was how he'd cure me from stealing his stuff. Johnny was shocked. But didn't your mom make him stop? He asked. Or move out or something? Joe's expression turned so deadly furious that Johnny flinched just from looking at him. My mom was a drunk, he said. She never did anything about it. Johnny just looked at him. He couldn't think of anything to say. You got no idea, Joe told him. You go to school, eat 3 meals a day, and make a big fuss over all your little problems. You got no idea how I lived. He shook his head and turned away from the beautiful car. Let's go. So with that scene, you can see the plot gets a little deeper. The mystery starts to open up a little bit, and we begin to learn about what haunts Joe so much. But Joe's in a good place. He's with some good people, he's going to have a chance to heal and grow and become the person that he could be. And if you want to hear that story, you're just going to have to read the book. So
There we go.
that kind of wraps it up on the 16th Avenue part there. Let me see. Next is World War II. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and try and make that transition now as I move from the first book found on 16th Avenue over to the second book, My Portion Forever. You know, I think that this is a kind of a common thread in so many of our families, that our grandparents, our uncles, sometimes our fathers went off to World War II, and they came back changed. The whole world changed after World War II. And I grew up hearing this. My father was a soldier. He served in Patton's army in the European theater, and our basement was just cluttered with memorabilia that he had brought back from Germany. So I kind of grew up with World War II being a reality for me, maybe more so than a lot of people these days. So I was always fascinated by World War II. And what I wanted to do with this book, of course, I loved my characters and I wanted them to grow up, go off to war and have exciting adventures, but I also wanted to have a female character in it. I wanted to have a little romance going on. I wanted someone who would love Joe as much as I loved him. And so I started about what would the sequel be like if we gave all these people 5 years, what would their lives look like? So let me go and share some things with you. Let's move on to the next screen. Here we go. Sorry, folks. This is My Portion Forever, and it's the sequel to Found on 16th Avenue. And you can see I've got my female character here. Now, you may recognize some movie stars and things like that, and I'm probably violating some copyright laws that show all these images, but this is not for profit, and it's less than 10% of what the books actually were, so I don't think I'm going to get in any trouble. You see my lady here has dark hair. She's not blonde like most of the Czechs, but you know, there were more kinds of ethnic backgrounds than just Czechs in the 16th Avenue neighborhood. There were also a set of people from North Africa, from the Middle East, from trying to get my name straight here, but I can't remember. You know what that's like. But let me just say, she grew up in a grocery store and with her grandparents, and at one point in her life she had to run away, and there wasn't much for a woman to run to if you were going to run away at the end of the 30s. But one thing there was the army was recruiting for nurses, as you can see by these posters, these army recruiting posters. And the army was a pretty good deal for a young woman. You went in, you got paid, you could get your nurses training for free, you were a lieutenant. Not that that meant much, but hey, you were. And it was a way of life that you could do, and you could get on your feet that way and have a community. And so that's what my heroine decided to do. So I had to start reading up. Whoops, sorry. Let's go this way. I had to start reading up, and I'd known a lot about World War II. I'd heard those stories from my father and his friends, but I needed to get set up on the real facts, the real details of what actually happened. And these two books gave me a lot of that factual information: An Army at Dawn by Rick Atkinson, and this wonderful book, And If I Perish, which is about the frontline Army nurses in World War II by Evelyn Monahan and Rosemary Needle Greenlee. And both of these books read like novels. I really, really had a blast reading them, as a matter of fact. But the very first I read about World War II was this book called Up Front, written by Bill Malden. Now, Bill Malden was just an exceptional journalist. He was a journalist, and he was sent to World War II to the army. He got into the army, and he mission of going and living amongst the troops, living up close to the front, and actually producing little newspapers called Stars and Stripes that would boost the morale of the men. And so he took it pretty seriously. He was a sharp writer and a wonderful cartoonist, and he had a very kind of sarcastic, satirical bent, and he often made a lot of fun of the officers because he saw things from the enlisted men's point of view. And I just want to show, whoops, I keep going to previous text. Sorry about that, folks. I told you that Zoom would get me. Here's a typical Bill Malden cartoon. The officer drives past, sprays everybody with mud, and says, "Oh, damn fine road, man." That's very typical Bill Malden. It's like, yeah, the guys do all the work and the officers just drive by. Let's look at another cartoon. Now, here's one that really struck home with me. Here's this medic. He's all dirty. He's not shaved. He's been pouring out his life 24/7 in the field for the guys. And he's combat troops because you don't fight. I've got a little internet trouble there. This was true. This is actually something that caused a lot of trouble and was eventually corrected. The medics weren't getting combat pay. The idea was that they weren't fighting, but the fact of the matter was they were in harm's way all the time. And this is another typical Bill Malden thing. Here's the guy in back of the line sitting and criticizing the ones up front, taking the hard brunt of it. Here's another one. Whoops, getting ahead of myself. Wait a minute, go back. I keep going forward. Okay, sorry, everybody. Now you're getting all my.
It's okay, Karen, you're doing great.
Okay, I told y'all this Zoom stuff had me going. Next. No, I have to go back. Come on. Well, dang. Okay, I'll try one more time. There's one more cartoon that I had. There it is. All right. This was my favorite cartoon. It's so funny. Here's this sergeant driving along in his Jeep, and he breaks his axle and the tires fall. So anyway, Bill Malden's book is full of cartoons like this. It's full of funny stories about enlisted men and officers. If you ever get a chance, definitely read it. But let's move on. There was another book that I knew of that I just loved. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut this off on my screen. They called it Purple Heart Valley, a combat chronicle of the war in Italy by Margaret Burke White. Margaret Burke White was the wonderful photographer and journalist that Life magazine sent to Italy to take photos of the troops and report on what she found. And Margaret was an awesome woman. I absolutely love her. So adventurous, so courageous. She went everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Look at this photo. How'd she get into this tent? This is the delousing tent where the men coming in from the front had to go and take showers to get rid of lice before they actually went back behind the lines and got new uniforms and hot food. So how did she get in there and get all these photos of these half-dressed men? And what about this guy back here in the shower? Doesn't he look like he's getting ready to get in a really cold shower? I'm telling you. The places she went, but here's one that I just love. I'm going to see if I can maybe zoom in a little bit for you here. Just look at these guys. Look at their faces. Look how young they are. They're all wounded. They're all beat up. They're all sitting here just talking, probably just happy to be alive. You know, she saw those things, and I think it's so wonderful that she stopped to share those memories, catch them for us. And she loved the nurses. And here's where I really got excited because she took fabulous photos of these nurses. Just take a look at these two here. They're going to the latrine. They're ankle deep in mud. And look at them. They're laughing. They look like they're having the time of their lives. And they're out there in Italy, and it was cold, it was rainy, it was muddy. They were being bombarded constantly by the Germans in the mountains above them. Now that's some spirit there. I just loved it. Now here's one that I really like, and this is a little bit odd too, of this over here, but look at this nurse here. You know, they had to wear men's uniforms because the Army had not yet developed women's combat uniforms. You can see how the legs are rolled up and they're so roomy in through here, and she's got the sleeves all pushed up. It's way too big for her. But look at all this. Look at the care that they are giving to this one wounded man. They're so intent on getting him stabilized so that he can go to surgery. And I just want to say, my husband is a really serious World War nut too, or World War II nut also is what I should say. We have a stretcher like this in our attic, exactly like this one here. And we have a blanket like this, World War II blanket. And during these chilly, cold days in San Antonio, we put that over our bed. Nice, and let's take a look. Now, as I began to put together all these facts and all these timelines, I started making another bulletin board, and I would put any image that caught my eye up on my bulletin board, and I would start to get a sense of who my characters were. Whoops, sorry, everyone. Okay, let's go back to that screen because I had something to say. Sorry, that was, okay, let's go down. Hold on, here we are. Here we are. Come on. Here we are, right there. Okay. Let's see. Can we see it yet? I'm having some trouble. I'll try it one more time. Well, we'll just go with this so you can see it. You can see this picture here is actually, if you're a Grant Wood fan, this is one of Grant Wood's paintings. It's called The Practical Optimist, and I just love the expression of this woman. She reminded me of one of the characters I read about in the history books. She was a chief nurse. She was a little older than most of the women, and she was just a courageous, fiery character. She'd stand up to anybody if it meant caring for the wounded. So I liked her a lot, and I put her on my bulletin board. And then I had this photo on my bulletin board of these nurses in action. And you can see these two here, they're just good friends standing outside their tent in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And then I like this one too. Now this is from a movie, but I like the way that these two people are talking to each other. They're just so intense. So that was my, that was part of my bulletin board for my reading. And now what I'd like to do is read to you just a little bit from my portion forever. I want to read a little bit about when my heroine goes to England. And I guess I have to give you a little bit of the background. My heroine is named Sana, and of course we have Joe from the previous book, who's all grown up and in the Army now. They both go into the Army and they don't know it. They had met in Cedar Rapids, kind of had a crush on each other, drifted apart. And then they meet again in England as all the nurses and all the soldiers are boarding these troop ships in the middle of a freezing cold rainy day to set off for war. So let me get started about the moment that Sana and Joe run into each other as they get ready to leave for war. The nurses at this point are all getting ready to charge out into this freezing weather and get into the truck that's going to take them to their ship. So here they are. They walked through a door and straight into the weather. Whipping rain stung their faces and they all put up their hands against the wind. "What idiot said not to bring raincoats?" Margie yelled. "Over here," Adele called, signaling them towards the truck. Sana pulled her bags tighter and yanked up the collar of her coverall as high as she could. Come on, run for it, she called. And they broke into a jog and ran straight into a group of soldiers crossing their path. Move it, Margie yelled. A male officer further up the line turned around and frowned at her. These people need to hurry, Checky shouted, rain streaming down her face. Somebody tell them we're drowning back here. American women, look at that. Soldiers standing in line along the dock were all gaping at them. Sana swung around. That voice. Her heart leaped at the sudden memory of fresh coffee and dill pickles, bakery and cigar smoke. She stared at the blue-eyed soldier looking straight at her. He was big and tall, like the Czechs in her uncle's store, and his voice was so familiar. But just then it was her turn to scramble up into the truck, and when she turned around to look for him again, the line of soldiers had moved, and he was gone. You know that guy? Margie asked. He reminded me of someone. Sana craned out the back of the truck, ignoring the calls and whistles, looking for that face from home again. He's a cute medic. I bet we see him again, Margie winked. Sana rolled her eyes. Checky, still holding her purse, slipped on the truck's wet bumper and fell back to the muddy dock. All her bags tumbled down and the men in line laughed. Shut up. That's a woman, snapped another soldier. Here, miss, he said, giving Checky a hand up. A woman, a woman. What's women doing here? Men everywhere turned to look again. We're the nurses, Margie yelled. Sana didn't look around. She was staring at the soldier. It was Joe Vaselli. Joe stared back at the dark-eyed woman in the truck, the thick, soft tangle of her lashes, the beautiful eyes. It was the girl from the grocery store back home. Sana, he called. His line of soldiers began to move away, but he walked backwards, trying to keep her in sight. Joe? Joe! Her truck was starting to move too, and she leaned out to catch his answer. Yeah. Joe waved, but just then the truck roared forward, and she waved at him as it turned and carried her out of sight. Dang! So that's it. Joe and Sana meet again, just for a moment. But it's a big moment. They both know that they're going to North Africa. North Africa was the first strike that the United States really made against the Axis powers of World War II. They struck against North Africa because they felt that the German presence there was the weakest. And since they were a new and inexperienced country and they weren't really ready for war, they thought that perhaps impact there in North Africa. And I want to tell you, the attack was very well planned, but when it came to the moment where everybody got out of the boats and got onto the beach, they sent the nurses right down those rope ladders and right into those amphibious boats to go right in on the beach with the men, right in during, underneath the bullets and everything else. And that worked today because nurses are such a precious resource. You don't want them going in with the first wave of the men, but they didn't really think that through. And so these nurses, like I said, they climbed down those rope ladders, got into the water, and got up on the beach with the men. And when I read about that scene in my research, I thought, I've got to write a book about this. I've got to write a book about these young women, some of them, still in their teens, early 20s, who went into war right with the soldiers. It was not, the nurses had wonderful spirits, but especially that North African campaign, they were not really protected. They were just right in there, in the thick of the battle up towards the front. So I want to read you another scene from another part of the book that shows you a little bit of the nurses in action. So let me go back to my screen again so we can look at that while I read. Let's try this and see if it works. No. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read. Now, in this scene, we have an unexpected bombardment, and the hospital, the little makeshift hospital, has just been flooded full of wounded men. And all of a sudden, there's a scream from one of the nurses. And Sana is called in. One of the nurses has fallen in love with the story. Sana knew, was it Joe? They're dead. She hurried over and stared down at the body for almost a minute before she realized that it was not Joe, but Mike. And the strange sound was Margie crying. Mike was covered in blood from his neck to his Adele was sprinkling sulfa into a huge red hole in his abdomen, and a medic was trying to wind bandages around his middle as another held his hips off the ground. The white cloth of the bandages instantly turned dark red. Sana knelt beside them. Not Mike, not Mike. Oh, Margie. Get the leg, Adele ordered. Sana pulled away fabric from a deep slicing gash that ran the length of one thigh. Someone pulled a crate to use as an IV stand and connected plasma to one arm and an upside-down beer bottle to the other. Red blood ran down from the tube. Sana looked at it in surprise, then over at Margie, who was wiping dirt and blood off Mike's graying face. I have to take a moment and tell you, blood transfusions were very new at this time, and they would collect blood in empty beer bottles. And that's what they used to transport the blood from one body to the wounded patient. And then when they were done, they would wash out the beer bottles and do it again. So that's why you had a beer bottle there. Anyway, back to the story. Adele checked the pulse again. Put 2 IVs in each arm. I want plasma and blood on both sides. How's the blood supply? We're down to 5 bottles, ma'am, the orderly said. Are you cleaning those empties? Yes, ma'am. Is that tent fire out? Yes, ma'am. Go call in all those type O firemen right now and get them refilling those bottles with blood as fast as you can. Yes, ma'am. The orderlies ran out on their errand. Adele swung around to Sana. I want you to special care Mike all the way through surgery into post-op. I can't tie myself up that long. And Margie, she shook her head. Keep giving blood and plasma until his blood pressure comes up. Suction if you have to. Do whatever you need to do. Yes, ma'am. Adele put an arm around Margie. You have to be strong for him. That's what he'd want you to do. Margie dissolved into tears again. Adele looked at Sana. Sana nodded and moved closer to Margie. Adele hurried off. Pulse, respiration, blood pressure. Margie was still crying, stroking Mike's blood-soaked hair and holding his hand. Sana patted her back and checked under the red-crusted bandages. His abdomen was deeply torn, intestines damaged. There was probably colon damage and back. The gash on his thigh would be the least of his problems. How could he lose so much blood and not be dead yet? Blood pressure dropping even further. Any lower, he would slip into irreversible shock. Oh God, don't let him die, don't let him die. Someone arrived with another bottle of blood and a can of plasma. 4 lines were now flowing into his veins. Sana kept checking, rechecking. Blood pressure kept falling, but then it held steady and steady again. Relieved, she hugged Margie. How you doing? He can't die now. Margie wiped her nose. I just met him. If we can get him into surgery right away, I think he's got a chance, Sana said cautiously, wondering if she was right to offer hope. I'm going to save him, Margie defiantly pushed back her hair, smearing blood across her face. He can't die. He can't die now. Two litter carriers brushed past them, almost knocking over one of the crates that held the plasma cans. Margie jumped to steady them, yelling, "Hey, you, watch where you're going." Men who had been lying quietly on their cots jumped and cried out. This could not go on. "Marge," Sana said. Marge stubbornly turned away. "Stop it. You're scaring the men. You can cry later." Margie looked around, her eyes swollen. "You can't quit on them." Sana held her gaze. "Now go get me another bottle of blood and a backup plasma." Margie lowered her eyes, and at first Sana thought she would not leave. But then she gently set down Mike's hand and went. So that's a little bit of Nurses in Action. I would say that there's lots of action scenes in this novel, lots of things that I drew right from the history pages, lots of details that are absolutely accurate. If you read the books and if you like them, if you're interested, then I'd say, there's so much out there to read about these courageous men and women. And it was just the beginning, really, of many changes. Changes as people grew up, changes as people got hurt, changes as people healed. When they all came back, they were different. And the home they came back to was different too. And in many ways, I think each generation perhaps goes through its own time. We're certainly going through a time now. I hope we can show the same kind of courage that our grandfathers and grandmothers and uncles and aunts did then. I hope we can make our society a better place. It's a long shot, but I think that if we continue to have people who will think deeply and read and think their own thoughts and take time to get away from their cell phones for a while and all of the news feeds for a while, we can gather ourselves together, make another push, and do well. So this is pretty much what I'd had planned to share with you. I know we want to have some time for questions and comments. Jenny, can I turn it back to you to coordinate that?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question earlier in the presentation about a railroad that was near the edge of town, or the water, the river, in that first map that you had shown. Do you know what that railroad was?
I'm sorry to say I don't. I should have figured that out, but it may have been, it must have been obviously a track that's not there anymore. There still are railroad tracks across the river, and that's where I have my railroad car action scenes take places in those tracks across the river behind 3rd Street. I actually don't know what's going on with that railroad track, but since you are the History Center, maybe someone there will dig into that mystery and come up with an answer for us.
Yeah, certainly. I'm sure our curator could dig it up. That's for sure. Does anyone have any questions for Karen? Feel free to unmute and maybe start your video and let us know your thoughts and your questions.
Karen, I think it was beautifully written. It was very interesting and exciting, and I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's so great. Now, I don't know who you are. What is your name?
Oh, Carol Gauger. I'm an old Czech, and I grew up in Cedar Rapids too, but I didn't have anybody in World War II, but I do know everything on 16th Avenue.
That is so great. I'm just honored to hear you say something like that. That's what really makes me happy. I don't think I'm going to make any money off this book, but the connection with the readers is absolutely priceless. And that's just what I love. Thanks for saying that.
Karen, I'm
Yes,
John.
sir.
John
Yes.
Hudson. I was a teenager during World War II. So I connected with your story because I kept a scrapbook cutting out things from Life magazine, for example, and keeping track of the news, what was happening overseas. So I really related to what you were writing, and I very much enjoyed your writing. You know how to put the right words in the right order.
Hey, I have to say that's high praise coming from John Hudson. He and his wife, Sandra, coordinate a group of writers that meets at the Czech Museum, and they are the Guild Writers. And I'm not sure what you're doing now during the age of pandemic, if you're still meeting like you used to, but I think they have produced a lot of wonderful books.
You may be happy to know that we have our fortnightly meetings using a free telephone conference call system.
Well, that's good.
So we all get on the phone and and we have our meeting and we read our pieces to one another. And so we are keeping it up.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that group. There's some great books that have come out of that group. So I'm glad to hear it's still going. Thank you.
Karen, my name is Kyle. I'm Jenny's dad, and I'm just curious as to where you live and what you're doing these days.
Well, I have ended up in San Antonio, Texas, and I absolutely love my new home. Married to a wonderful man who is also a World War II buff. Actually, we met when I was doing the cover for this book. I wanted to find a real World War II helmet and jacket for my nurse to wear. And everyone in my church said, well, you've got to go talk to Vic Hash. And that is actually how we met. So we live happily together in a house that is just full of memorabilia from World War I and World War II. He's even got some Civil War artifacts that I shouldn't mention, but he did get them before the law went into effect that said that you couldn't take those things off the battlefields. He got it from his grandfather's farm, so it's a perfectly legal thing to own. But yeah, we're having a pretty good time. I love San Antonio. If any of you ever want to come visit, we have a guest bedroom, and we'll take you down on the Riverwalk, and then we'll take you out to dance at the Blue Bonnet Palace. So thanks for asking. Yeah, I'll pitch it big for Texas. I absolutely love it. But when I come back to Iowa, it makes it all the sweeter. I just see it again and hang around the people. Everyone talks just like I talk, we all talk the same way. I just love to hear that Cedar Rapids voices coming through. So there you go. Now I'm seeing more names. I hope someone's got something to say or some other question to ask. Of course, I guess we're almost close to our time when we have to stop, huh, Jenny?
Well, we had some trivia. Go ahead.
Anita Burke is trying to speak, but she's on mute. Jenny, can you tell her how to get off of mute?
Let me see if I can do it for her. Where is Anita?
She's right below Karen on my screen.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
There.
There you go. Oh, well, we still can't hear you. Shoot.
Well, maybe Anita can call Sandra and tell Sandra what she wants to say.
Anita, you can also use the chat function down below. If you click on chat, you can type your question into our little chat session here, and I can help you. I can help facilitate that question too. Karen, we had some trivia questions. I don't know if you want to dive into any of those too.
Let's do some trivia questions. If anybody can answer one of these trivia questions, you get a free book, okay? So Jenny lays some of those trivia questions on them.
Okay, so anybody that can answer these questions can get a free book. So all the questions, Karen, or just one?
However many we have time for.
Okay. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna either drop that answer into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and be the first to answer the question. And I'm gonna jot your name down and connect with you to get that free book. So what were the 3 major community halls in the Old Czech neighborhood? The 3 major community halls in the Old Czech neighborhood. Can anyone answer?
And I'll chime in and give you a hint. They're all on 3rd Avenue and they're all still in use today. That's a hard one, Jenny. I don't know if we're going to get an answer on that.
Any guesses? Any guesses? No takers.
No takers. Okay. One of them is the CSPS Hall, which has been beautifully remodeled. One of them is the, oh, Jenny, help me out. What are the initials of the other dance hall there?
So my dad's got 2 of them.
Oh, he's got 2. Well, let's
He's
let
got
him answer.
2. He said the CSPS, the so-called gym, and there's one more. Dad, you were just there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The ZCBJ Hall.
There you go. All still in use today. Isn't that great? Okay, so Jenny, your dad gets a free book.
Well,
You can fix him up. Fix him up with me and we'll figure out what he wants, okay?
okay, we'll figure that out. Next question. What kind of liquor was legal for anyone to drink during Prohibition? Not illegal, legal.
Altar wine.
Well, I hadn't thought of that. That's a true
Oh.
answer. Whoever said that gets a free book.
Right?
Say that again?
What, Sandra?
I was just asking you to mention the percentage of beer. There's a certain percent of beer that's always legal.
Well, the real answer is if you made your beer yourself, if it was homemade beer, you could drink it. And who knows what the percentage of alcohol was in someone's homemade beer. But yeah, they had quite a few little kitchen breweries back in that time. But I hadn't thought about the altar wine. That was a good answer too. Okay. So if you want your free book, contact Jenny and I'll get one right over to you. That was a good answer. Thank you. 2 good answers.
Here's another good question. This is really fun. Why did a bale of hay cost $5 at the 16th Avenue hardware store in 1928? What could possibly make it be $5?
Now, you're sure it was a bale? Because bales are, I thought, were newer than that.
Well, when the old volunteers told me this story, they used that word. They said bale of hay. Now you got to remember a quart of milk sold for about 7 cents. So why would a bale of hay be worth $5? Anybody got an idea?
What was hidden inside?
What was hidden inside? What do you think? Come
Well,
on, somebody say it.
it was prohibition back then.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
It was a bottle of liquor. You could get a regular hay bale or you could pay $5 and get the special bale of hay with the liquor inside.
Okay.
Yep. The party just went on. It didn't stop it at all. So that's great. Okay. Well, who was that was talking?
John.
John?
Yeah, John Hudson.
Oh, John. Well, I guess you're going to get 2 or 3 free books. Too bad they're all the same one. Oh, that's
Well,
great.
Karen, should we move to the World War II trivia?
Let's do a few of those questions. I would love to.
Okay. What were the names of the 2 opposing groups of nations fighting each other in World War II?
The Allies and the Axis.
All right. Who was that quick answer?
John Hudson.
No, John, you'll be my new bookseller is what you'll be. John, good job. Good job.
And how many years did World War II last?
Well, it depends who you ask.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's probably
Britain
true.
or America.
Yeah, it lasted from 41 to 45 for the States and 39 to 45 for Europe.
Yeah, that's true. Um, some people say 6 years, but that was the best answer I've ever heard on that subject. So was that John again answering?
It was.
Ah, John, man, you're scorching us.
Well,
Okay, let's
remember, I
do
was a
one.
teenager through that whole period.
Yeah, you got all your memory there too. You're pretty sharp, man. You must be.
You have to remember that World War II, for some of us old folks, isn't history, it's our lives. so, so, so we may not know much about history, but we know a bit about our lives.
That's so great. That's so great. Yeah.
Well,
Well, let's
should we
do
do
one more. Yeah.
one more? Okay. Well, this will probably be easy. Who was the president of the United States when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
FDR.
Franklin
Franklin Delano
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
And
That's
everybody said.
Very
Yay.
good. Very good. Yeah. Well, that was easy. I was hoping for some of these other folks to chime in on that one. Good enough. Jim. Thank you.
Well, do we have any other final questions for Karen before we sign off?
Yes, Karen, in terms of the medical aspects that you were writing about, did you talk with physicians of that period, or how did you get your information?
I did get most of it from books. It was kind of hard for me to track down doctors and nurses from that time, but there's a lot that's been written. And I just want to say the books that I did read were wonderfully written, and they included wonderful details. I didn't want the story to get too bogged down in technicalities. You know, I didn't want it to read like a manual or a history book so much. I really wanted the story of the characters to be primary, and then just bring in a few details here and there to give it a greater sense of reality and authenticity. So I didn't get real deep into the medical technology part. Just the interesting parts, like using beer bottles for
That was interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a big story back then. So it was pretty cool. It was real interesting to read about.
My aunt was a dietitian in the Army during the war.
My goodness, that must have been quite challenging.
I imagine so.
Yeah, nothing like K rations to keep you skinny. Any more comments or questions?
Yeah, I had a cousin who was an officer aboard one of the big battleships. It was either the USS Massachusetts or it might have been the Iowa. I think it was the Massachusetts.
We have a question from Anita, and that is, when is your next book coming out?
Oh Lordy, you know, Anita, I'm still working on it. But I've got all my readers' emails. I keep you all updated on when it's coming out. The next story will be set in Naples when the American soldiers landed in Naples. That's just a fascinating culture, fascinating time, so much going on within just such a small geographic space. You know, you have the entire city of Naples that is full of Italians who are so weary of war. They've been beat up so much and endured so much. And there's famine and, good Lord, illness. And in the midst of that, they reopened their opera house in the middle of town. And then just a few miles up in the mountains, the trenches are set, and the Americans and the Germans are so close to each other they can talk back and forth as they battle it out in the mountains there. And then there's the whole thing of Anzio, the beachhead of Anzio, where the nurses and doctors were trying to keep a foothold, and they were constantly barraged just night and day by the Germans. And a lot of them became just ill, just depressed and stressed out. And it's quite quite a drama. So that's where we're going, and it'll be out soon. And I will contact you just as soon as I can, because hopefully we'll have another reading on that one pretty soon.
Well, that sounds like a great plan, and I hope that we can certainly have you back, Karen. I really appreciate your time and all your effort to put this program together for us tonight. And on behalf of the History Center, thank you so much to everyone for participating. And you can find out more about what the History Center is doing by finding us on the website at historycenter.org or looking for us on social media. But I guess now would be a good time to say thank you and sign off. Great job tonight, Karen. We really appreciate it.
Love
Thank
all.
you,
Have a
Karen.
wonderful
Thank you,
evening.
Karen.
Okay.
Thank you,
bye-bye.
Karen.
Thank you.